Obtained emails from the Trump transition team. Joining us now live from the White House is Ed Henry. Ed?
Judge, good to see you. Democrats are trying to pour gasoline on this fire by spreading rumors that the president may try to fire Robert Mueller. The president insists that is not true, though his allies outside the White House are trying to undermine the special counsel's credibility. In fact, a lawyer for the president's transition to power is trying to make the case Mueller himself tainted the probe by obtaining tens of thousands of emails from the time period between the election and the inaugural. Mueller did this not by issuing a subpoena that would be known to the Trump legal team, but instead went directly to the General Services Administration, which helps manage bureaucratic functions, including the transition. Trump for America, Inc. counsel Corey Langhofer declaring that career government workers potentially hostile to the president, quote, unlawfully produced transition private materials, including privileged communications to the special counsel's office. Peter Carr, a spokesman for the special counsel, pushed back, quote, when we have obtained emails in the course of our ongoing criminal investigation, we have secured either the account owner's consent or appropriate criminal process. But Alan Dershowitz, a longtime Democrat, says this was a close legal call, so it was foolish for Mueller to fail to make this airtight by seeking an easily obtainable warrant. Dershowitz adding Mueller should have immediately disclosed to the public he had in fact removed FBI agent Peter Strzok from the case because of anti-Trump text messages rather than waiting a couple of months. Here's Dershowitz.
I think he has a credibility problem. He should have been more careful about who he hired. He has been conducting a sloppy investigation, and that's atypical of him. I'm surprised. When you're going after the president, you have to be Caesar's wife. You have to be above reproach.
Now, another Democrat, Mark Penn, who advised former President Bill Clinton, has just conducted a poll for the Hill newspaper that found 54% of the public believes that Mueller has conflicts of interest in this investigation. 63% of the public said the FBI is withholding key information about not just the Trump, but the Hillary Clinton investigations as well. Judge?
All right, Ed, thanks so much. And also tonight, the Wall Street Journal has a stunning new report about the text message between FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI lawyer Lisa Page that's been getting a lot of attention. In a text from August 2016, Strzok wrote, I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. Fox News couldn't confirm, but believes the Andy reference in that text was referring to Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. And tonight, the Wall Street Journal is reporting, quote, an FBI agent's reference to an insurance policy in a much-debated text message was meant to convey that the Bureau needed to aggressively investigate allegations of collusion between Donald Trump's campaign and Russia, according to people familiar with his account. And joining us now with reaction is Fox News contributor, former Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor and former Clinton pollster Doug Schoen, and Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. All right, Greg, I'm going to start with you first because, you know, Mueller's getting these records from the presidential transition team. I'm not sure that everybody understands, you know, how wrong this is, and you're going to tell us the legal aspect. But this is not government property.
No.
And this includes information that has to do with national security, attorney-client. There is a statute, in fact, that controls how you access this information.
Right.
An MOU. Tell the viewers.
For several reasons, these are private documents. First and foremost, the transition team is organized as a private nonprofit. And the chief records officer of the United States sent a letter to the GSA and all other agencies saying, remember, these are private documents. They're non-government employees, therefore non-government property.
And he sent that right before the transition team, or as soon as they got in, to remind everyone, hey, the rules still apply, everyone.
So that means legally that Mueller just can't walk into the GSA and hand over these records from a custodian, because the GSA doesn't own the records. The Trump transition team does, and they're private. He has to get either a warrant from a judge or a subpoena for a grand jury. He got neither one of them. Even the GSA admits they handed it over just based on a letter. Now, under the law, that's excluded as evidence under the exclusionary rule,
right.
which you know. And if they also receive privileged documents, which the transition team lawyer argues those lawyers, including Mueller, can be disqualified and removed from the case.
Before we get to removing Mueller, any information, it's kind of like fruit of the poisonous tree.
It is exactly
with the Strzok dossier and Strzok being the affiant and that being used to get a FISA warrant, the allegations, of course, that Strzok was the affiant. But what you have here is if indeed there was review of these documents and West Wingers were interrogated or interviewed with respect to information from this, nothing can be used. So that the evidence itself is inadmissible.
If they questioned Flynn with those documents, Flynn's lawyer should go into court and withdraw the plea and have the charges dismissed because it is fruit of the poisonous tree exclusionary rule.
Okay. You know, Doug, without getting too legal here,
Sure.
I mean, you heard that there's a statute, there's a regulation, there's a reminder.
Right.
Why do you think this guy in GSA just handed over the records and didn't say, where's your subpoena, buddy?
I don't know, but I would very much hope the Trump transition team immediately goes to court to seek to get legal validation, if it be that, for what Greg Jarrett I think
how do you do that unless and until there are charges filed? We can make those allegations with Mike Flynn.
As I understand the law, and I defer to my colleague here, that when there is imminent harm that can be done, you can go into court and get an emergency restraining order. And I think this is one of those cases. What I worry about, Janine, is this is getting too political. If Robert Mueller is removed, we will have a constitutional crisis in this country.
Well, the president's not going to remove him. And some Democratic congressman was, oh, yeah, the rumor in Washington is he's going because of this. She's wrong.
But what Robert Mueller needs to do is appoint an ethics advisor, so that he has
Too late.
No, it isn't too late.
Jason, is it too late?
It isn't too late.
Is it too late?
It's not too late.
Doug says no. What do you
No,
think,
that's
Jason?
ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous that they need. This is the very top echelon of FBI agents and Department of Justice personnel, and you're telling me they don't know what the ethics of it are? That they shouldn't be in charge of this investigation? It just, you know, the fix was in at the beginning. And you know what? If it was a Democrat president and a Republican Department of Justice, you know, they would, come on, if the tables were turned, everybody in Washington, D.C. would be yelling and screaming. But it's not. It's Donald Trump. So they leave it alone and they let it keep going.
Now, the truth, Jason, is that your committee had oversight over GSA. Now, you're familiar with all of these regulations, these guidelines. Why would someone in GSA just say, oh, great, they want it, let's give them all these records? Because they're deep state, possibly?
I mean, the deep state is alive and well. And look, you get a letter from Director Mueller telling me to turn over those documents. You're not an attorney. They should have gotten some legal advice. Basically, all GSA does is turn on the lights, provide some office space, give you a couple of ID badges and some computers to turn on and say, here's some office space so you don't have to go try to rent and figure this out during the critical time of the. But they didn't have the right to turn them over. They didn't have possession of them. That wasn't theirs to turn over.
All right, but Greg, now you got these lawyers on this Mueller team, and they know that they are in possession of privileged information. They know it. They know the players. They know their jobs. So shouldn't those lawyers be brought up before, some grievance committee because they didn't notify the person? Look, we've got this stuff that is privileged. You have a right to at least argue that we don't have it.
Every lawyer at DOJ knows that when you get a huge cache of documents, you have to set up what's called a taint team to make sure, third-party team, to go through the documents, segregate the privileged material from the legitimate material, and make sure that the lawyers on the case don't ever see those privileged documents. And now, according to the transition team lawyer, the folks at the special counsel's office admitted last Friday in a phone conversation, we didn't set up the taint team.
Well, they didn't. And the fact that they had the nerve to go around the law, around the regulations, around the requirements, Doug, it bothers me.
It bothers me. And the reason why I recommend somebody like former Supreme Court Justice David Souter, unimpeachable, a Republican, is to get to the bottom of this so that we can go forward with as much confidence as possible. Look, this bothers me, too. I'm a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. But I want a fair, transparent investigation. And I'd also, as I've said here on this program, like Hillary Clinton investigated, too. We've got a lot to investigate, and we need to get as much credibility as we can in Mueller's investigation.
But Jason, at the end of all of this, isn't it about if the president, if you kind of riff or see how he's handling this, he's basically saying, I'm not going to fire him. And he's basically saying, you know, there's nothing there. It was outrageous, but there was really nothing there. It seems that this really is winding down. And don't you think that the president now has some leverage on Mueller? Because he could bring them up on ethical charges without a doubt, to me.
Well, you know, some have suggested that there'd be a second special prosecutor. How's that first one working out? I wouldn't do a second one. I really do believe that it's time for Attorney General Sessions to go. I don't think he's up for the job. Every time I see him, he looks like he's some prisoner. And the whole reason we have a special prosecutor is because we have an Attorney General who can't do his job. And we have deep-seated systemic problems within the Department of Justice. We need a real leader there that's going to take control and root out the deep state and what they're doing, the tentacles that they have. And until that happens, I think this is going to continue on. I really do.
But you know, the sad part of it, Jason, is you've got Andrew McCabe, who should have been fired the day Christopher Wray came in, and that Christopher Wray hasn't done it makes me concerned about the new head of the FBI, Christopher Wray. And you've got Rosenstein with all of his conflicts. He's supervising Mueller, who's best friends with Comey, and I could go on and on. This is awful. And you know what? I'll give you 10 seconds, Greg. Wrap it up.
Well, I agree that, and I've written many columns saying Jeff Sessions should resign. He's recused himself out of the job. The president clearly wants him to go. Jeff Sessions should do the right thing for the good of the country and good for the Justice Department to quit. Let somebody else come in who can actually do the job.
Well, yeah, or who, you know, has prosecutorial instincts. And
I would agree. We need a new attorney general. I'd like to get somebody nonpartisan in to strengthen the credibility of the justice system. Janine, whatever side you're on is very, very tainted.
I agree with you. I mean, this is not supposed to be this way.
Exactly.
Politics in the FBI,
Correct.
the Department of Justice, what, 64% of Americans think that the FBI is withholding documents? Because they are.
We're leading
Why?
Why? Because we are leading to a constitutional crisis where people do not have confidence in the basic institution.
You know what? It's more than a constitutional crisis. We're at the point where people are about to revolt because they don't have the right to run Washington this way. And that's my final thought. Not that you asked. Coming up, constitutional law professor Alan Dershowitz says Attorney General Jeff Sessions should unrecuse himself. That's interesting. In the Russia investigation. He joins us next. And later, President Trump unveils his America First national security strategy. Former UN Ambassador John Bolton will have reaction. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hannity. Joining us now with reaction to the latest controversy swirling around Robert Mueller's team is the author of the book Trumped Up: How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy, Alan Dershowitz. All right. Good evening, Professor Dershowitz. It's good to have you here tonight. Now, you wrote a fascinating article saying that Trump doesn't need to fire Mueller. And you say that there are certain tactics that can be used that are almost better than actually firing him. Talk to us.
Well, I learned about this from Red Auerbach, the great coach of the Boston Celtics, who told me one day when we were sitting at a Celtics game that whenever he used to scream at an official and yell at the official, he would always get the next call in his favor. Then I heard the same thing from a baseball player who said when he protested a ball or a strike, he would get the next call. I think that's the tactic that's being used here. You continuously attack Mueller. You bring up every possible issue, whether it be conflict of interest, hiring the wrong people, failing to get a warrant for the emails, using the dossier to get the national security warrant. And Mueller, who's so concerned about his integrity and his reputation, may very well be inclined to lean over backwards to show his fairness and to make a close call in favor of Trump rather than against Trump. So I suspect that's probably what's happening. They're playing the refs, as it's called in sports.
Well, you know, aside from the baseball analogies, I mean, you're an attorney. You understand that there are rules, there are guidelines. And we were talking about this in the other block. If you have possession of documents as a lawyer that is privileged, it contains privileged information, then you are ethically obligated to at least notify the person whose information you have. And Mueller's team knows all this. Are they playing by the rules, or are they just hurting themselves here?
Well, they're claiming that they have these thousands of emails, and they haven't even gone through them yet to determine whether any of them are privileged. They're also taking the position that nothing is privileged because everybody was on notice that this was the possession of the government, the property of the government, not the property of individuals. But that violates core notions of civil liberties. People have reasonable expectations of privacy.
Right.
They don't expect that their emails to their lawyer or the emails to the future president of the United States, the president-elect, would be looked into without a subpoena or a search warrant. And it was so easy for Mueller to go and get a search warrant. You used to be a judge. You know, you just go to a judge, make any kind of plausible presentation, you get your search warrant. Why not do it? He's been conducting a very sloppy investigation. And when you're going after the president, you can't afford to be sloppy because you know that there are going to be people taking advantage of every mistake you make, and he's made too many.
And you know, Professor, when you talk about, you know, the .gov and no expectation of privacy, this presidential transition team, there are statutes that apply to them in particular, regulations, memos of understanding. So I can get the, you know, you have no expectation of privacy on certain servers.gov, but this is surrounded by particular legislation and regulations and memos of understanding. I mean, it's outrageous.
No.
I think it's outrageous.
Of course.
Okay.
Well, let me tell you the hypocrisy. You have people on the other side making the following two arguments. Number one, they say that, of course, there can't be any privilege because he wasn't a government official. He wasn't the president yet, so there can't be executive privilege. On the other hand, they say they were public officials for purposes of being able to get the emails. You can't have it both ways. You have to pick a theory, and they're inconsistent.
Well, you have to pick a theory, but, you know, in addition to that, I think what we've seen with Mueller is with this whole thing with Peter Strzok and, you know, the woman with whom he was having the affair, Lisa Page, who worked for the FBI, and they're talking about, you know, they're going to have to get an insurance policy, and, you know, they have this meeting at around the same time. Strzok, who's in charge of counterintelligence, that we start this Russia probe on the alleged Trump-Russia collusion. Mueller doesn't say anything about Strzok and the realization that he found out that there were all of this anti-Trump sentiment. I mean, it's venomous. It's horrible.
But he did get rid of him. On the other hand, he kept that secret. He did it. No. He did it as soon as he found out about it, but he didn't tell the public until months later as a result of a lawsuit brought by a group of lawyers. So, look, I think Mueller is a decent and honorable man who cares deeply about his reputation, is trying to do the right thing. He made a terrible mistake. When you're going after the president who's a Republican, I know, who's a Republican, you take much more care in who you put on the investigative team. You make sure that it's Caesar's wife. Everybody has to be above reproach. He didn't pass the Caesar's wife test. Now he's being careless in obtaining evidence without warrants or subpoenas. Those play right into the hands of the Trump team, and there's just no good reason why a good lawyer should do that.
Well,
I would never allow somebody working for me to do anything like that.
Nobody working for me would do it, but it's bullying. And don't you think it's interesting, though, how the president's team is handling it? You know, they're not really going full bore on this one. I think that the facts speak for themselves. And by the way, you know, you say that he's made one or two errors. I think he made an error right from the get-go. The fact that he applied for the job to be the head of the FBI and didn't get it, the fact that he's so tight with Jim Comey, and as you know, the two of them think they've made history together when John Ashcroft was in the hospital. I mean, that is classic conflict of interest. You know it, Professor. Admit it.
Well, I think that the very idea of appointing a special prosecutor defeated the purpose of any inquiry. We want an open public inquiry, a bipartisan inquiry, to make sure the Russians never intrude on an American election and tell what we get. Instead, what we get is behind closed doors, grand jury. We're never going to learn anything. Everybody is yelling, lock him up, lock her up. That's not the way to proceed. We shouldn't be criminalizing political differences. We should be gathering information from every side. This was a terrible election. It was an election filled with problems, and we ought to use it as a lesson to avoid problems like this in the future, and the special counsel is the worst way to do it.
Am I hearing you say that even if in all of these open processes we find that the law is violated, we don't prosecute people?
No, if you use the criminal law last, not first. When you appoint a special counsel, what you're saying is, We know there were crimes committed. Now let's find out what crimes they were. Stalin talking to Lavrenti Beria, and Beria saying, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. That's not the way America should work. We should first do an investigation, an open-ended, nonpartisan 9/11 type investigation.
Well, then why was Bruce Orr?
Why was
Bruce Orr allowed to go to the Intelligence Committee? We have no idea. He's the guy whose wife worked for Fusion GPS on the anti-Trump dossier, and then he has a meeting with Fusion after they lose the election. And I can only conclude, I mean, that, you know, they're going to try to get their story straight. I mean, that doesn't help either.
Well, we should look into all of these issues to avoid recurrence in the future. We have to clean up our election system, and we shouldn't do it through a special counsel. Somebody before mentioned that Mueller should appoint an ethics consultant. I had proposed that in my article this morning. I even named David Souter as one such person. That would help him at least avoid these problems in the future. Look, the Trump people would rather see him have ethical problems because it gives them ammunition. It's in Mueller's interest to clean up his act and go forward smoothly.
It's a little late in the game. I think he's lost all credibility. But, Professor, thanks so much for being with us. And coming up, President Trump unveiled his America First national security strategy. We'll get reaction from John Bolton and from the Deputy Assistant to the President for Strategic Communications on the National Security Council. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hannity. Earlier today, President Trump laid out his national security strategy, where he promoted American strength. Take a look.
We're here today to discuss matters of vital importance to us all: America's security, prosperity, and standing in the world. With every decision and every action, we are now putting America first. To counter Iran and block its path to a nuclear weapon, I sanctioned the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for its support of terrorism, and I declined to certify the Iran deal to Congress. We have dealt ISIS one devastating defeat after another. The coalition to defeat ISIS has now recaptured almost 100% of the land once held by these terrorists in Iraq and in Syria. Our campaign of maximum pressure on the North Korean regime has resulted in the toughest ever sanctions. We have united our allies in an unprecedented effort to isolate North Korea. For the first time ever, American strategy now includes a serious plan to defend our homeland. It calls for the construction of a wall on our southern border, ending chain migration and the horrible visa and lottery programs. In addition, our strategy calls for us to confront, discredit, and defeat radical Islamic terrorism and ideology, and to prevent it from spreading into the United States. America will lead again. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but we will champion the values without apology.
Joining us now with reaction, Deputy Assistant to the President for Strategic Communications on the National Security Council, Michael Anton. Good evening, Michael. The President's speech was very consistent with everything that he's been saying since the campaign, except now it appears that he's at a point where he can talk about improved economic situation in this country with the stock market as well as the defeat of ISIS. It's almost as though it's a one-year report card where he succeeded.
Certainly the speech was in part a one-year report card. It's also a speech to roll out, introduce to the American people the strategy document, but that strategy document is informed first and foremost. We began with his campaign speeches. We continued with his major foreign policy addresses of 2017, and of course all of his actions in 2017 to change the course of American foreign policy. So he wanted to both talk to the American people about the new strategy, or at least the new strategy document, because as I say, it's a strategy that's already been in operation for this year, and to give a report card to say to them, this is what I've been doing, this is what we've accomplished, this is the path that we're taking going forward.
And, you know, when the president talked about defeating ISIS and recapturing almost 100% of the territory that they had conquered, I mean, you would think that he would be getting some credit for that, especially given the fact that President Obama was like, you know, it's going to be a long time. It's going to take years. I mean, this president comes in, it's like bing, bang, boom, they're gone.
He's getting some credit for it, but I agree with you, not nearly enough. And a lot of the reason why that campaign accelerated so quickly this year was a fundamental change in strategy, including loosening of various rules that had micromanaging decisions being made here at the White House, as opposed to devolve down to commanders in the field to make the decisions that they best saw fit. So we've seen a really rapid degradation of ISIS capabilities in the Middle East and almost the destruction of the physical caliphate. You notice he said nearly 100%. I said almost. We don't want to say we're all the way there yet, but certainly we're miles ahead of where we were when this administration came into office. And that's very important because while it'll be difficult to fully eradicate ISIS as a group, when they don't control territory, population centers and resources, their ability to project power and threaten us at home or at our installations overseas is reduced dramatically.
All right. Michael Anton, thanks so much for being with us. And joining us now with more reaction to President Trump's national security strategy is Fox News contributor and former U.S. ambassador to the UN, John Bolton. All right. Good evening, Ambassador. I want to talk about the latest story that it appears that the Obama administration, in their effort to get this Iran deal passed, basically passed on Hezbollah and let them off the hook. And but they deliberately overlooked the drug trafficking and the smuggling operations, weapons trafficking, and it was across the board. Treasury Department, Justice Department, along with State Department. Whoa. Can you think of a good reason for that?
Well, I think in Obama's mind, his administration would have done anything to secure the nuclear deal with Iran and would have taken no steps that in any way jeopardized that deal. And this treatment of Hezbollah, the things that were laid out in the article that Politico published about that you've just mentioned,
unbelievable. Yeah,
I think are perfectly believable when you look at what Obama was up to. Look, Hezbollah has been an Iranian-directed terrorist group. Even in its constituent parts before Hezbollah itself came together. The bombing of the Marine barracks in Lebanon, 1983, was an Iran-directed operation.
Right.
This is the A-team of international terrorism, and Obama appeased it because he didn't want to do anything that might offend the Ayatollahs in Tehran. And this is just a piece of the record. There is so much that Obama gave away to get that deal that when the full record is laid out, Americans will be appalled.
You know, Politico that did the story, and there's a headline, the secret backstory of how Obama let Hezbollah off the hook. In its determination to secure a nuclear deal, the Obama administration basically looked the other way. It had to have been clearly demoralizing, Ambassador, for people in the DEA. I mean, they put their lives at stake. They've got undercovers. They've got all kinds of information and assets out there that they are trying to protect. And the Obama administration is delaying or rejecting their efforts. And the worst part of it is that, you know, 60,000 Americans die every year of drug overdoses. And, you know, while these people are bringing in cocaine into the United States, the president of the United States is saying, oh, you just ignore it, you know, let it pass.
Yeah, as I say, whatever made the Iranian regime happy, Barack Obama was prepared to do. So this is, as you're pointing out very graphically, sacrificing key American interests in order to make the Iranians happier to come to this deal. There wasn't anything Obama wasn't prepared to give away, and he came very close to giving away the entire story. This deal was made in heaven for the Iranians. Obama was happy to solve it because fundamentally he didn't think that they were the problem. He thought once he could show that America didn't have a hostile intent, that the Ayatollahs would join the civilized world and everything would be happy. Since they signed the deal in the summer of 2015, 2015. That has not happened. His premises were wrong. His negotiation was bad. This deal is terrible, and I hope the next demonstration of the America First strategy we see is the president rejecting the deal in its entirety.
Well, and that certainly is a possibility. But, you know, it really is amazing, Ambassador, that Obama, President Obama, just laid back when it came to everything. I mean, I will never forget the prayer breakfast, that first national prayer breakfast, and I don't recall who had just had their head cut off. And, you know, the president comes out and says, well, you know, you Christians, it's, you know, get off your high horses, really your turn. I mean, he laid back for everybody. But, you know, there have got to be Americans out there whose kids died at about that time from overdoses, who have to be infuriated. And, you know, we talk about blood on the president's hands. I mean, this is a lot. The nexus is a lot clearer here. But I want to talk about someone else now, and I'm going to ask that they put the sound on Clapper in his criticism of President Trump goes so far as to try to show how Vladimir Putin is using the president as an asset. Take a listen.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
You're saying that Russia is handling President Trump as an asset?
That seems to be that's the appearance to me.
You know what's so amazing? I mean, the backstory here is that the CIA was in a position to give intel to Russia and to, whether Putin or his people, regarding an attack on a Christian church or a Greek Orthodox church, Russian Orthodox, in Russia, in St. Petersburg, I believe. And he calls and says, thank you. And this guy Clapper criticizes the president. Now, here's my take on this. Do you remember when the Russians told the FBI about the Tsarnaev brothers and the Boston bombing? They said it once, and the FBI didn't listen. And then they called them again, and the FBI said, well, they didn't give us specific information. And you got to give the Russians credit. They listened to the CIA, and they stopped the attack on the church.
Yeah, look,
what's your take?
I think this communication about the Tsarnaev brothers, we still don't know the full story of why the FBI didn't take it seriously. And I hope that's something the Justice Department is looking into. But to come back to General Clapper, I'm not holding my breath, but to come back to General Clapper, he just accused the president of treason, essentially. He's saying that he's a witting Russian agent. And, you know, if he's got evidence for that, I'd like to hear it. This paranoia really is causing enormous negative consequences for our democratic institutions. And to go back to your earlier discussion about the independent counsel, unless there's evidence of collusion, of which we have seen none so far, I really think there's got to be a way to draw this investigation on that score to an end, and really to narrow Mueller's, the dimensions of Mueller's probe. It's a real danger of these independent counsels. Right. They're out of control. Right. They're not supervised.
He in particular.
It's
and
dangerous.
Unethical at the same time. Anyway, Ambassador Bolton, thank you so much for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
All right, and coming up, more reaction to President Trump's major America First national security speech. Dan Bongino and Jessica Tarlov are next. Stay with us.
We want strong alliances and partnerships based on cooperation and reciprocity. We will make new partnerships with those who share our goals and make common interests into a common cause. With this strategy, we are calling for a great reawakening of America, a resurgence of confidence, and a rebirth of patriotism, prosperity, and pride. And we are returning to the wisdom of our founders.
Welcome back to Hannity. That was more of President Trump's national security speech from earlier today. Joining us now, former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov. All right, Jessica, the president's speech today, as I said a couple minutes ago, it seemed almost like a year-end report card talking about his accomplishments when it came to the economy and ISIS. Right. And, you know, dealing with the issue not just of defeating ISIS and taking over almost 100% of the territory that they it conquered, but also talking about the political ideology behind it, and making America first, and making sure that we have the jobs and the allegiance to this country.
Yeah, I felt like it was actually much more focused on domestic issues than it was on international issues. The president, from the campaign trail to his first year in office, has made it a point to call out other countries and even our own allies that they're not paying their fair share, for instance, and that these international organizations don't work. He was very focused on what's going on here, the economy, as you mentioned, but also immigration, shutting down the lottery system, chain migration. So it felt like really a true America first take on it all. And it was interesting to see it vacillate between what I imagine General Kelly wanted and a little Stephen Miller maybe thrown in there.
All right, where's Kelly? Kelly's on immigration.